Picture this. You are 14 years old, standing in a cold stone chamber, stripped of comfort, stripped of safety, stripped of dignity. Around you, the walls sweat with dampness, their grey surface lit by the restless glow of torches that spit and crackle in the silence. The air itself feels heavy, pressing against your lungs as though it carries centuries of secrets and sins. In front of you stand women of rank and authority, their eyes sharp, their faces unreadable, their hands moving with mechanical purpose. They do not look at you as a child. They do not look at you as a person. To them, you are a specimen, a body, to be measured, judged, and recorded for the sake of kingdoms that care nothing for your soul. The Duchess of Bedford lingers at the edge of the chamber, motionless but suffocating in her presence. Her jeweled fingers are clasped together at her waist, her chin lifted in quiet superiority. She does not touch you, yet you feel her control in every breath you take. Her gaze is a weight you cannot shake, heavy as iron chains, reducing you to less than human. Every twitch of her lips feels like a verdict, every shift in her eyes a silent declaration of guilt or innocence. She is not here for you. She is here for the alliance, for the king, for the politics that will decide whether you live as a queen or are discarded as a fraud. Your body trembles, but it is not from the February chill that seeps through the stone. It is terror, pure, paralyzing terror, because you know that the fate of nations, the treaties signed in ink, and the hopes of your family now rest upon this single moment. If they decide you are unworthy, your crown will vanish before it ever touches your head. If they decide you are flawed, you will become a shadow, a scandal whispered about in corridors, erased from memory, but never from disgrace. You are not simply a girl, you are a pawn, and every breath you take in this chamber is a reminder that your worth has been stolen and repackaged as currency in the hands of others. The silence is unbearable. Only the faint drip of water echoes in the distance, each drop a cruel reminder of time passing. You try to retreat into your own mind, to remember simpler days in the castle gardens, where you once ran barefoot through morning dew, when innocence meant laughter and not trial. But memory offers no escape. The present is merciless. You are here under their gaze, and the cold reality seeps into your bones. Your body is no longer your own. It belongs to politics, to power, to people who will never care to know your heart. And so you stand, trembling in the flickering light, as history engraves itself into your skin. You are not the first to endure this chamber, and you will not be the last. But right now, under the sharp stare of the Duchess and the dispassionate hands of her attendants, you feel the crushing loneliness of being utterly powerless. The humiliation is complete, and the verdict has not even been spoken. The walls themselves seem to close in, their ancient stones soaked with the echoes of countless whispers, cries, and verdicts that came before you. How many young women had stood where you now stand? How many had felt this same suffocating air, this same weight of judgment? You imagine them, ghostly figures layered over your trembling body, each one repeating the same silent terror, each one reduced to nothing, more than proof for a kingdom's bargain. Their faces blur into one another, their fear identical to yours, their dignity crushed in the very same way. The chamber is no longer just a room. It is a tomb of innocence, a place where girlhood is buried, and where the machinery of power begins its merciless grind. The attendants move without hesitation, their routines rehearsed through repetition. For them, this is not cruelty. This is duty. But for you, it is violence without weapon, an assault without blood, and yet more devastating than any sword. Their hands are clinical, their eyes detached, but the consequences of their judgment will ripple far beyond this chamber. A single nod or shake of their head, a single phrase uttered to the Duchess, will decide if you are elevated to a throne or cast into obscurity. They hold kingdoms in their fingertips, and yet they carry out their task as if they are merely folding linens or preparing bread. Their indifference is the sharpest cruelty of all. You want to scream, to tell them you are more than this, that your worth cannot be reduced to whispers of purity, to the stale dogma of tradition. But even if you found your voice, it would drown in the silence. No one here would listen. No one here would care. The Duchess does not see a girl. She sees a treaty. The attendants do not see innocence. They see procedure. And the walls do not echo with compassion. They only preserve the rituals of humiliation, generation after generation, binding the present to the past in a chain of cruelty. Your heart hammers violently, a drumbeat that fills your ears until you can no longer hear anything else. Each thud feels like it will betray you, exposing your fear, your shame, your unbearable vulnerability. The torches flicker, the shadows writhe, and for a brief dizzying moment, you feel as though the chamber itself is alive, conspiring against you. It feels as though the very stones have aligned with the Duchess, waiting for your collapse, hungry for your disgrace. You grip at nothing, your hands trembling at your sides, desperate for some anchor, some tether to hold you upright. And in that moment, you understand something chilling. You are not enduring this ordeal alone for your own sake. You are enduring it for men you have never met, for crowns you will never wear freely, for dynasties that will trade your body as casually as merchants trade cloth. You are here as proof of an idea that women can be reduced to seals of legitimacy, tokens of virtue, sacrifices laid upon the altar of politics. And no matter the outcome, a piece of you will never leave this chamber. The silence in the chamber is not empty. It hums with expectation, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and forces you to notice every sound your body makes. The shallow pull of your breath, the irregular rhythm of your heart, the faint quiver of your knees as they threaten to give way beneath you. Each movement is magnified. Each tremor feels like a confession. You are trapped in a theater where your own body is the stage and your humiliation is the performance demanded by those who wait beyond these walls. You glance once toward the torchlight, desperate to anchor yourself to something steady, but even the flames betray you. They bend and twist at the slightest breath of air, dancing mockingly as though they, too, bear witness to your shame. Shadows creep across the walls like silent spectators, stretching and recoiling with every flicker of light, turning the chamber into a hall of distorted figures. It feels as though the darkness itself is watching you, leaning closer, eager to record every detail of your disgrace. And then a cruel thought slips into your mind. What if they decide against you? What if their verdict is unfavorable? You imagine the consequences. Your name whispered in contempt, your future stripped away, your family's honor crushed under the weight of your supposed failure. You see yourself locked away in some forgotten convent, condemned to obscurity, while the world moves forward without you. Your body, which you never thought of as anything but your own, has been transformed into a battlefield where alliances are fought, where treaties stand or collapse. And if you lose, you will not only lose your crown, you will lose your identity. The Duchess remains still, her presence as suffocating as the damp air. She is patient, watching the attendants with hawk-like precision, her expression never betraying thought or mercy. In her silence, you hear centuries of women before you, queens, princesses, noble brides, who had all endured the same scrutiny. Some passed and became legends, their crowns shining so brightly that their humiliations were forgotten. Others failed, erased from history, their names buried under whispers, their lives rewritten as cautionary tales. And you, trembling here in the cold chamber, are on the edge of that same blade, balanced between glory and ruin, waiting for strangers to decide which way you will fall. Time loses meaning inside this chamber. Each second stretches into eternity. Each gesture of the attendants becomes unbearable in its slowness. You try to retreat into memory again, back to mornings in the gardens, when the scent of roses clung to your hands, when laughter spilled from your lips without consequence. But memory is fragile here, collapsing under the weight of the present. The stone walls do not care for your childhood. The Duchess does not care for your innocence. The attendants do not care for your fear. In this place, all softness is stripped away, leaving only the cold machinery of power grinding forward. And you realize with sickening clarity, this chamber is not only a test of your body, it is a test of your submission. It is meant to remind you that you are not your own, that before your crown rests on your head, before your throne welcomes your presence, before your people even know your name, you belong to them, to the state, to the dynasty, to the politics that treat you as property, as collateral, as proof of purity rather than a human being. The walls may be stone, but the true prison is this truth, pressed deep into your heart. You stand there, unable to resist, unable to flee, caught in a ritual older than your birth, a tradition sharpened by centuries of cruelty. And in the silence, in the flickering half-light, in the cold that bites at your skin, you feel the final piece of your girlhood slip away. Whether the verdict falls in your favor or not, you will never be the same. This chamber will follow you for the rest of your life, echoing in every step you take as queen, shadowing every decision, reminding you of the day your worth was reduced to something you could never control. The chamber holds its breath. Outside its heavy walls, the world waits. But in here, time is frozen, stretched thin as the flicker of torchlight that paints the stones with restless shadows. The attendants circle you with quiet calculation, their movements deliberate, their gestures slow, as if the ritual gains power by dragging on longer than flesh or spirit can endure. Their murmurs rise and fall like distant echoes, words half heard, heavy with implication but cruel in their secrecy. They do not speak to you, only about you, their language a wall that keeps you trapped on the other side, a prisoner of silence. The Duchess of Bedford remains unmoving, but her stillness carries more weight than the attendant's hands ever could. She does not need to touch, does not need to speak. The gleam in her eyes is enough to remind you that she is the one who matters, that her gaze is the ledger in which your fate is being written. The faint rustle of her gown when she shifts her weight is louder to you than thunder. In that sound lives judgment, expectation, the readiness to announce a decision that will echo beyond your lifetime. Her presence is suffocating, and though she stands apart, her shadow seems to fall directly over your heart. The chill of February lingers in the stone and air, creeping up through your bare feet into your legs, gnawing at your bones until you can no longer tell whether your trembling belongs to fear or cold. Shame is not simply on your skin. It has crawled deeper, wrapping itself around your lungs, your stomach, your very breath. You feel hollowed out, reduced to a vessel waiting to be filled, not with honor or glory, but with a verdict that will determine whether you are fit to be paraded as queen or discarded as a disgrace. You tell yourself not to think of failure, but failure seeps into your mind like water through cracks. You imagine the future collapsing before it can begin. You see yourself cloistered in some remote convent, condemned not for sin but for suspicion. You see your family's ambitions wither into ash, their pride broken by whispers. You see the courtiers beyond this chamber snicker behind their jeweled hands, the men who sign treaties shrugging off your humiliation as nothing more than a failed gamble. You see your name fading from history, preserved only in hushed gossip as an example of a girl who could not prove what was demanded. The thought is unbearable, but it coils tighter with every passing moment. The attendants exchange a glance, their faces trained to reveal nothing but betraying just enough to make your blood run colder. One tilts her head, another raises a brow, and though no words are spoken, you feel as though a verdict has already been whispered in silence. The Duchess leans forward ever so slightly, the faintest narrowing of her eyes confirming that she too has seen something. And then there is nothing. No statement, no conclusion, only the silence of deliberation stretched to breaking. It is Then you realize the true cruelty of this ordeal is not simply in the inspection. It is in the waiting, in the unbearable suspension between salvation and ruin. The silence is not merciful. It is sharpened into a weapon, keeping you hovering above the abyss without ever letting you fall. You are forced to stand in this purgatory, your heart pounding against your ribs, your thoughts spiraling into terror, while they linger over your fate as though savoring your despair. And in that endless silence, a thought rises unbidden, sharper than all the others. If even a queen-to-be must endure this degradation, what hope is there for any other woman? If power, title, and bloodline cannot shield you from being reduced to flesh on display, then what protections exist for the countless women without crowns, without courts, without even names recorded in history? How many girls like you have been erased entirely, their suffering buried beneath centuries of dust, their voices never given the chance to echo even as faintly as yours? The chamber does not answer. The torches sputter, their flames bending under some unseen draft, as if mocking your question. The Duchess watches, the attendants deliberate, and you remain suspended, powerless, knowing that no matter what verdict is spoken, you will never leave this chamber whole. Whether declared pure or condemned as impure, a part of you has already been taken. For this was the unspoken truth of these ordeals. They were never about truth at all. They were about control, about reminding even the most exalted daughters that their bodies were not their own, about ensuring that before a crown could rest on your head, humiliation must first weigh upon your shoulders, about proving that no matter how high you might rise, you would always be tethered by chains forged in tradition and cruelty. And so, in the silence, you wait, your breath shallow, your pulse frantic, your dignity stripped bare. The air feels heavy with centuries of repetition, as though the ghosts of all the women before you linger in the walls, whispering their own unspoken verdicts. You stand among them now, another figure added to the procession of the humiliated. The attendants glance once more at the Duchess, her lips part, not yet to speak, but to draw in a breath that feels as though it will decide your fate. The moment stretches, unending, suffocating. The entire world seems to shrink to this single room, this single second, this single breath, held by the Duchess of Bedford. And in that pause, a truth colder than the February air pierces you. It does not matter what she says next. You have already been judged. The test itself was the sentence, and the shame you carry from this chamber will follow you long after the torches have burned out. And the haunting question lingers. If the crown demands this, what does it truly mean to be a queen? Blanche of Navarre was born into a world where her name meant more than her laughter, her blood more than her dreams. From the moment she took her first breath, she was not a child but a vessel, a thread in a political tapestry woven long before she arrived. Her cradle was surrounded not by lullabies, but by murmurs of treaties and dowries, her every step observed with calculation. Navarre was a kingdom of mountains and valleys, proud but vulnerable, wedged between powers that saw it as both ally and prize. For its rulers, alliances were everything, and daughters were the currency. To marry Blanche into a stronger house was to secure protection, wealth, and legitimacy. But that bargain came at a cost Blanche herself never agreed to pay. From girlhood, she learned that her body was not hers. Nurses reminded her that her hands must remain soft, her skin pale, her voice gentle, every detail preparing her to be inspected like a relic. She was taught to sew, to sing, to walk in silence down long corridors where the eyes of noblemen lingered. Lessons came not in books or wisdom, but in purity, obedience, and composure. By the time she reached adolescence, whispers followed her. Whispers about her betrothal, about her duty, about the test every princess must endure. She knew of it not from teachers, who spoke of it only in hushed tones, but from the terrified stories of older girls who vanished from court after their wedding nights. Some reappeared, crowned in jewels, their smiles as fragile as porcelain. Others were never seen again. Virginity, they said, was proof of honor, proof of untainted lineage, proof that a bride's womb could bear an heir of unquestioned blood. But beneath the sanctity of these words lurked something uglier: mistrust. The belief that women, especially those tied to power, could not be trusted unless inspected, measured, and marked by others. And so, castles became cages. Every step Blanche took reminded her of invisible chains. She could not laugh too freely, lest it be taken as flirtation. She could not linger near servants, lest suspicion arise. She could not even run in the gardens as she once had as a child, for a torn dress or scraped knee might lead to gossip of impropriety. The castle walls seemed to whisper their warning: one misstep, and you will be judged. Her mother, Queen Joan, carried her own scars from the same system. She seldom spoke of her youth, but in quiet moments, Blanche saw the weight behind her eyes. Joan had endured her own trial, her worth measured in silence before being accepted as a bride. Though she survived, she had never forgotten the humiliation. For Blanche, she offered comfort, but not escape. She knew the system was too strong to resist. It wasn't only women of noble birth who suffered. Across Europe, countless girls, peasants, and princesses alike were subjected to similar examinations, though the outcomes differed depending on rank. A commoner might be discarded, whipped, or sent into exile. A princess might be annulled, her family dishonored, her alliances shattered. Either way, it was always the girl who bore the shame, never the men who demanded proof. Blanche grew up, haunted by stories of those who had failed. A cousin whispered that one young bride in Aragon was declared unfit and locked away in a convent, never to see daylight again. Another tale told of a girl in Castile who was paraded half-naked through the streets after being accused of deceit. These stories became legends of terror among young girls of Blanche's circle, shaping their silence, their obedience, their fear. By the time she was promised to the Duke of Bedford, an Englishman nearly twice her age, Blanche knew her fate was sealed. She would leave Navarre, leave her childhood, leave her identity, all to serve a throne not her own. And before she could step into that role, she would face the ritual. The virginity test was never written into law. It was tradition, upheld by whispers and by power, as binding as any decree. Men cloaked it in words of honor and necessity, claiming it protected dynasties. In truth, it reduced women to flesh and suspicion, their dignity stripped in exchange for crowns. The Duchess of Bedford, who oversaw such tests, was known as a woman of sharp eyes and sharper words. To her, young brides were specimens to be examined, tools to secure alliances. Blanche had heard of her long before stepping into Rouen Castle. They said she could tell at a glance whether a girl was worthy. And so Blanche's journey carried her from the green valleys of Navarre into the grey stone walls of Rouen. Each mile northward was another step into her fear. She travelled not as a child filled with curiosity, but as a prisoner awaiting trial. The castle loomed upon her arrival, its towers cutting into the winter sky like blades. Within those walls waited her fate, sealed in the hands of strangers. As she stepped into the grand hall, the weight of eyes fell upon her. Courtiers judged her walk, her face, her silence. She was paraded not as a bride, but as an object, her every movement scrutinized. Behind jeweled masks of civility, the whispers began. Would she pass? Would Navarre's alliance hold? Or would she be discarded, her body condemned as unworthy? Blanche could not know. All she knew was that the test awaited her, and that her life, her family's honor, her country's future, balanced on the verdict of women who had long since traded compassion for power. The days before the examination stretched like years. Blanche felt the castle closing in on her, its stone walls pressing tighter with each hour. From the windows, the world looked distant and unreachable, a smear of winter sky, a scattering of crows. She was caged in rituals, in whispers, in silence. Every morning, servants entered her chamber with bowls of lavender water, urging her to cleanse. They laid out gowns of white linen, garments that spoke not of beauty, but of purity. The symbolism was inescapable. She was not a girl, not even a bride, but a sacrifice being prepared for the altar. The Duchess of Bedford appeared often, her presence cold and deliberate. She spoke little to Blanche directly, but her eyes swept over her like an appraiser examining a jewel. Every glance felt like a test, a reminder that Blanche's body was no longer hers. It belonged to scrutiny, to tradition, to power. At meals, Blanche noticed how the courtiers looked at her, some with pity, some with curiosity, and others with calculation. She was the subject of their wagers, their whispered debates. Would Navarre's princess uphold the alliance? Would her body prove untainted enough to secure peace? They spoke, as though she were a parchment, her body a contract waiting to be signed. The night before the test, Blanche could not sleep. She lay awake beneath heavy curtains, staring into darkness. Memories of childhood flickered, the warmth of her mother's hands, the scent of wildflowers from the Navarre valleys, the freedom of running barefoot in the grass. But each memory dissolved into the reality of the present, a chamber where strangers would pry into the most sacred parts of her being. Fear tightened around her chest. She had been told, again and again, that a queen must be strong. But strength, she realized, was a word meant for others, for men, for rulers. For girls like her, strength meant silence, endurance, survival without complaint. And she was not the first. Blanche knew the stories of those who had stood in her place. Some had passed, walking out of those chambers crowned in jewels. Others had failed, their lives shattered in a single declaration. She remembered the tale of Princess Eleanor of Castile, whispered in court corridors, how she had cried out during her examination, and how her tears were used against her as proof of shame. She had been cast aside, her family disgraced. Each story weighed heavily. They were warnings, carved into Blanche's imagination like scars that weren't hers, but might soon be. When dawn finally broke, she rose without needing to be called. Her chambermaids dressed her in a simple gown of white, its fabric stiff and unyielding. The corridors were colder than ever, the air biting at her skin as she was led toward the chamber. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting, as though the castle itself were counting down the moments. The hall outside the examination room was filled with silence, heavy and suffocating. Blanche's hands trembled as she clasped them before her, praying no one noticed. The Duchess appeared once more, her face unreadable. She did not speak, but her gesture was enough. The door opened, and Blanche was ushered inside. The chamber smelled of stone and smoke. Shadows pooled in the corners, candles flickering against damp walls. Two midwives stood waiting, their expressions trained into masks of detachment. They had done this countless times before, and to them, Blanche was just another body, another test, another verdict to deliver. Her heart pounded so violently, it seemed to shake her entire frame. She wanted to run, to cry, to vanish, but her body betrayed her, frozen in place. Slowly, the women gestured for her to disrobe. Her gown slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. Naked, she felt stripped not only of clothing, but of identity. She was no longer Blanche of Navarre. She was flesh, inspected under the cold light of suspicion. The midwives' hands were rough, clinical, impersonal. Their touch was not one of care but of judgment, every movement a reminder that her worth was measured in silence, in humiliation, in fear. The Duchess observed, her eyes sharp and merciless. The midwives murmured between themselves, words Blanche could not catch, their voices low and deliberate. Every syllable sent terror spiraling through her. Was that approval? Doubt, condemnation, minutes stretched into eternities. Time bent in that chamber, until Blanche could no longer tell whether she had stood there for moments or hours. Her body ached with tension, her throat dry with unshed cries. She forced herself to breathe, to remain still, to endure, because everything, her life, her family, her country, depended on her endurance. The chamber was silent except for Blanche's own breathing, shallow and ragged. Her chest rose and fell, as if every breath might be her last. The air was thick, carrying the dampness of stone and the acrid smoke of half-burnt tallow candles. The walls seemed to close in, as if the castle itself was complicit in her humiliation. The midwives circled her slowly, their eyes hard, their hands efficient and unyielding. Each touch was an assault, not of violence, but of violation, stripping away layers of dignity until there was nothing left but flesh. Blanche's skin burned with shame, though the chamber was freezing. She tried to anchor herself in silence, in stillness, but her body trembled, betraying the storm within. The Duchess of Bedford stood at the head of the chamber, her posture erect, her eyes narrow and commanding. She was judge and spectator, her power radiating through the air like a noose around Blanche's throat. Every flicker of her gaze, every faint shift of her lips, was a verdict waiting to be sealed. Blanche dared not meet her eyes. One of the midwives cleared her throat softly, a sound that seemed to echo louder than a drum. They exchanged glances, quick, practiced, silent. Then came the gestures, the tools of their trade laid upon a small table, cloths, bowls, strange instruments whose purposes Blanche could only imagine. She wanted to cry out, to beg them to stop, but her voice had been buried long before this moment. Her body was no longer her own. As they examined her, Blanche felt the room tilt. Her vision swam, her ears filled with the roar of her own pulse. She remembered the stories she had heard, of girls who screamed, who fainted, who resisted. Their resistance was always used against them, their dignity shattered twice over, once in the chamber, once in the court beyond. She must not resist. She must endure. The minutes stretched like centuries. Each movement of the women's hands was another strike against her humanity. They discussed her as though she were absent, a specimen to be classified, a body to be measured. Their words were clipped, clinical, devoid of empathy. At last, they withdrew. The silence that followed was worse than their touch. Blanche stood, trembling, her body aching from the effort of stillness, her soul hollowed out. Her gaze flicked to the Duchess, waiting, dreading the verdict. The Duchess stepped forward, her footsteps deliberate, echoing across the stone floor. She paused before Blanche, studying her with the cold precision of a hawk. Then she turned to the midwives. A single nod passed between them, a silent language Blanche could not decipher. Her fate was sealed in that nod. But whether it meant salvation or ruin, Blanche could not yet know. The Duchess raised her chin and spoke at last, her voice sharp and steady, carrying the weight of centuries of cruelty. "This girl is pure." The words should have been a relief, but instead they cut deeper than any condemnation. Relief was drowned in humiliation, in the knowledge of what had been taken from her in order to prove it. She was pure, not by her own truth, not by her own right, but by the verdict of strangers who had violated her. The chamber exhaled around her. Servants moved, cloths were gathered, candles flickered low. Blanche's gown was returned to her trembling hands, and she clothed herself in silence. The fabric felt heavier now, as though it carried the weight of every eye that had seen her stripped bare. She should have felt victorious. She should have felt secure in her future as Duchess, as Queen. Instead, she felt nothing, only emptiness, because she understood, in that moment, that she had not won anything. She had only survived, and survival, in this world, was never enough. When she was led back through the corridors, the courtiers' eyes followed. Some nodded in approval, others whispered behind jeweled hands. To them, she had passed a trial. To Blanche, She had lost something that could never be named. And yet, this was only the beginning. For though the verdict had spared her from disgrace, it had also branded her forever. Her body would always be subject to scrutiny, her worth forever tied to the eyes of others. The ritual might end in the chamber, but its shadow would follow her into every room, every throne, every bed. This was the true cruelty of the virginity test. It was not just a moment of violation. It was a lifetime of being reminded that her body was never her own. And as Blanche walked into the halls of Rouen, crown and duty waiting ahead, she realized that her story was not hers alone. She carried the voices of countless women silenced before her, their battles hidden in shadows, their suffering buried beneath the triumphs of kings. The climax of her ordeal was not the verdict itself. It was the crushing awareness that history would never speak of what she had endured, that the songs sung of queens would never mention the cold chamber, the trembling body, the hands of strangers, deciding their fates. History would remember Blanche of Navarre as a bride, a duchess, a pawn in alliances. But it would not remember this. The night when her body became a battlefield, her dignity the casualty, her silence the price of survival. Blanche walked out of the chamber draped once again in fine linen, but she carried with her an emptiness no fabric could cover. The verdict had spared her honor, yet it had stolen something far more precious, the sense that her body belonged to her. From that day forward, she was not Blanche, the girl from Navarre who once ran barefoot through meadows. She was Blanche, the verified bride, the certified womb of alliances, the silent figure behind treaties signed by men who would never know the taste of her terror. The castle celebrated. Whispers of disgrace dissolved into toasts of triumph. The Duchess of Bedford reported with satisfaction that the alliance was secure, that the girl was unspoiled, that the throne's legacy remained untarnished. In the banquet halls, goblets clinked and music filled the air. But behind the spectacle of triumph, Blanche sat in silence, a ghost haunting her own body. For the world, she was victorious. For Blanche, she was broken. As months passed, she learned to wear the mask expected of her. She smiled when summoned, walked with grace, bowed when commanded. To those around her, she was the perfect bride, a symbol of Navarre's honor and England's strength. But within, her thoughts circled endlessly back to that chamber, to the cold touch, to the verdict that defined her future. Every crown she would ever wear would feel heavier because of that night. The cruelest part was not the test itself, but the silence that followed. No one spoke of it again. The court, the duchess, the midwives, all acted as if it had never happened. But Blanche could never forget. Silence became its own prison, a reminder that some truths were never meant to be acknowledged. She had endured something unspeakable, yet to speak it was forbidden. And she was not alone. Across kingdoms, girls just like her endured the same ordeal. Some were crowned, some were discarded, many were forgotten. Their bodies became battlegrounds for dynasties, their pain buried under layers of history that chose to celebrate kings while erasing queens' humiliations. History books would not record the virginity tests. They would write of alliances, of battles, of treaties sealed with marriages. They would glorify the pageantry while ignoring the cruelty behind it. Blanche's suffering would dissolve into silence, her story told only in whispers. And yet the shadow of that system stretched far beyond her lifetime. Because this was never only about one girl. It was about control. It was about the way societies wrote rules that shackled women to their bodies, reducing them to vessels, stripping them of agency. It was about a world that built thrones and empires on the stolen dignity of its daughters. Centuries later, echoes of these practices still haunt us. The methods may have changed, but the message persists. Women's bodies remain policed, questioned, doubted. Even now, cultures across the world enforce tests of purity, demand proof of innocence, dictate worth through control of the flesh. The cruelty of Rouen Castle lives on, disguised in new names, hidden behind new traditions. Blanche's story is a reminder of this continuity, a chain of injustice that binds past to present. Her silence was forced, but we are not bound by it. To tell her story is to break the silence, to remember what history tried to erase. When we reflect on the horror of virginity tests, we must ask ourselves, what kind of civilization builds its legacy on humiliation? What kind of power requires the degradation of its daughters to secure its throne? And what does it say about us if centuries later we still allow echoes of this cruelty to exist? Blanche of Navarre passed her test. She was declared pure. She went on to wear jewels, to sit at tables of power, to bear the weight of a crown. But beneath the titles and the robes, she carried scars unseen, scars not from failure, but from survival. The test did not kill her body. It killed the part of her that once believed she was free. Her story is not one of triumph, nor of defeat. It is one of haunting, the kind of haunting that stretches across generations, reminding us that silence is never innocent. So when we remember queens, let us not only remember their crowns. Let us remember the chambers of stone, the cold hands of strangers, the fear in the hearts of girls who never had a choice. Let us remember the pain that history tried to erase, and let us dare to ask, how many empires were built, not on valor, but on the stolen dignity of their women? And how long will we continue to look away?